And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Preterist Apologetics. My name is Don K. Preston, and with me tonight, or I'm with him, I don't know which it is, but anyway, we're here together for you on Preterist Apologetics. Mike, good to see you again.
Good seeing you, brother.
All
Yeah.
right, what are we going to do specific? We've already talked about it. Folks, I think you're going to enjoy this. Uh, you know, as most of you who tune into this program know, on January the 3rd, Mike and I debated Jeremiah Nortier and Sam Frost. And one of the things that Mike did in his presentation, and I've told different people that Mike's presentation was a master class in exegesis. It was just, it was beautiful. It really was beautiful. And it was extremely powerful. Uh, in my estimation, if a person has very much integrity to them, and I'm not trying to impugn anyone's integrity, but I just simply say people with open hearts and open minds, after listening to that and listening to my presentation as well, I just don't see how they could just dismiss it. Well, the way that Jeremiah and Sam dealt with our presentations was to literally say not one single word in response. But one of the things that Mike did in his presentation is to show that God had a kairos and a divinely appointed time for the end, how that is developed in the book of Daniel, how it's refined in the rest of the Tanakh, Old Testament, and then refined even more when we come to the New Testament period, with both Jesus and the New Testament writers saying, ha, the appointed time has come.
It's near.
It's near. And so this is such an incredibly important topic, ladies and gentlemen. And the tragedy of it is when you've got men like Jeremiah or like Sam who literally ignore it, who will not even address it. But instead, if they do say anything, then like Sam did in his quote discussion unquote of Deuteronomy 32, he ignores the word kairos. He said it's there, but he did not describe or define what kairos means and its eschatological significance and its application by the New Testament writers or the biblical writers as a whole. He just mentioned, well, that's the Greek word kairos. Okay, thank you. Yes, we know that. It's not a mystery, at least to some of us. But why are you ignoring its significance and meaning? So, point of it being, the book of Daniel is a book that uses kairos, both the word itself and the concept, to talk about the end times. Now, let me make one more observation. I'll turn it over to Mike, and he can kind of lead us into the discussion specifically. But the way that Sam Frost does that, and he has written a book entitled Daniel Unplugged or Unchained, whichever.
Unplugged, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Unplugged of all the
Okay.
power.
Yeah. So anyway, the way that Sam gets around um, the significance of kairos, both directly linguistically and thematically, is he denies that Daniel chapter 2 is not or is messianic, has nothing to do with the Roman Empire. He comes to Daniel chapter 7. Oh, no, no, no. It's not messianic. Oh, well, yeah. Verse 13 and 14 is talking about the ascension, but that's a parenthetical insertion into the text that nobody told us was there.
Because really, that whole period is supposed to be the time of Greece, not the time of Rome. And then all of a sudden, the ascension just pops up right there in the Grecian Empire out of nowhere.
Without a word of indication before the verses, without a word of indication after the verses, it's just like there.
Yeah.
Poof.
It's a mess.
Yeah. So, anyway, in this text, which is all about the determined time of the end, and then it's not messianic except for that parenthetical insertion. And then you come to Daniel chapter 8, surprisingly enough. Well, it does use the word kairos, but it's not messianic. It's all about Antiochus Epiphanes, which is Daniel chapter 7, which is Daniel chapter 2. Well, then we come to Daniel chapter 9, and it's not messianic. Even though it uses the word kairos, the appointed time of the end and the end of the appointed days. Nope, not messianic, not messianic. And then you come to chapter 10 and 11. Oh, yeah, you find kairos in those chapters. But again, that's the Maccabean period. That's the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. And you come to Daniel chapter 12, which has the Kairu Eskatu, the appointed time of the end. Well, that's the appointed time of Antiochus Epiphanes. Oh, but wait, Daniel chapter 2, chapter 12, verse 2, we have another parenthetical insertion that just magically appears.
Man,
Many of those
God's a really bad communicator.
Yeah. Many of those who sleep in the dust of there shall arise, some to everlasting life, some to everlasting condemnation. That's not that doesn't belong to the time of Antiochus. This is the end of human history. Well, how do you know that? Because it follows immediately grammatically, verse 1. At that time there shall be great tribulation. Oh, wait a minute. Sam Frost says verse 1 is the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. So even though Daniel chapter 12 talks about the appointed time of the end, and as a matter of fact, it even uses the term eskatu hemeron, which is the last of the days, which Sam Frost says, well, the last day has to be the end of human history. But wait, Daniel chapter 12, verse 3 is another one of those magical parenthetical insertions into the discussion of the time of Antiochus Epiphanes.
Exactly.
So you have Sam Frost undoubtedly well aware of the meaning of kairos, but he goes to Daniel and he refuses to allow Daniel to be messianic in spite of the New Testament usage of Daniel. So that is a little bit of a lead in, Mike. So take us away.
Yeah, so so far in our review, we're kind of reviewing my presentation, how I developed the Old Testament as far as the framework for the Olivet Discourse. And I did that with Deuteronomy 32, where the appointed time would be near in Israel's last days in a specific perverse and crooked generation, and how the New Testament and Jesus uses those to say that the appointed time was near and that he was going to come in vengeance in that generation. Now, I didn't get any response from that at all. And then I showed how Daniel picks up the ball from Moses and narrows down the appointed time to the Roman Empire. And even more specifically, when you really look at that 490 years and how the first century Jews were calculating that, right down to the generation, actually. So it's very clear, and I saw right away as I was studying for this why Sam did what he did in the book of Daniel. He has to get preterism out of his head, and this was really the only way to do it. And so I also talked about in the affirmative that these guys are straying from the Old Testament pattern. The Old Testament pattern is the time texts refer to when God said he would come on the clouds in judgment to judge a nation or the nations or the world in a near time frame. It was always within the lifetime of the prophet and his contemporaries, between 3 years to 36, depending on who you read. And the language was apocalyptic. God wasn't literally coming on a cloud. The decreation, the heavens being rolled back, stars falling, that was referring to the religious and civil rulers of the nation at that time. And I showed Jesus is using that same hermeneutic, and you guys have flipped it upside down. You're saying the time texts are always near, so you're spiritualizing that away to mean nothing, and you're literalizing the decreation language to the end of world history. Again, got nothing on that. And so last show, we were talking about how Sam finally tried to deal with the day of the Lord passages in the Old Testament, skipped completely over Ezekiel 7, 12, 30, and 32 completely. And apparently try to defend that always near position, even in the Old Testament Day of the Lord passages, because he would constantly say, well, that didn't happen. That didn't happen.
Yeah.
The fullness didn't come in Joel's time, in Isaiah's time, in Daniel's time. The fullness, which is Kairos, the fullness didn't even come in Jesus's generation or the New Testament's. It's still in our future. So it was always near in the Old Testament. It was always near in the New Testament. And 2,000 years later, it's still always near. So it's a complete lexical, contextual, indefensible position to have that these guys decided to take. And so tonight we thought we'd spend some more time in Daniel, because last time we spent time looking at the Ezekiel passages and Isaiah and Joel and Deuteronomy 32. So let's unpack Daniel a little bit. Don's already done a really good job of just kind of giving us a overview. But what happens in Daniel chapter 2? Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. He has a dream of, the statue divided into 4 world empires, and a stone cut without hands comes and strikes the feet and judges those world empires. It's very significant, this phrase, cut without hands. We see this phrase in the New Testament, without hands, a circumcision, a baptism without hands, temple without hands. This is key to understanding that the New Testament kingdom is spiritual. Jesus and the New Testament authors are exegeting Daniel chapter 2, trying to tell you that this kingdom is spiritual, and when Christ is revealed, it's going to be revealed within you.
Yeah, let me make an observation here. Many, many, many scholars who are by no means, no stretch of the imagination are the preterists, but the very terminology that you are talking about right here, a kingdom or a stone cut out without hands, a mountain cut out without hands. Men such as Timothy Gray, I'm sitting here trying to remember the name of his book right now. I just simply remember, if anybody wants the name of the book, that's fine. I'll get it for them. But Timothy Gray does a really, really good job of developing the usages of not made with hands as found on the lips of Jesus and Paul in the New Testament, showing this is a contrast between the old covenant system and the new covenant system, and he takes it right back to Daniel. He understands the connection between Daniel chapter 2, verse 44, and, all of these New Testament texts that use this terminology of the temple not made with hands, the tabernacle that God pitched and not man. And so when what Mike is pointing out here is not only what the text says, but we can add to that scholar after scholar after scholar sees the connection between Daniel 2:44 and the New Testament usage of that language, correlating them. But Sam Frost says, oh, no, Daniel was not talking about the church, the kingdom not made with hands. No. He wasn't talking about the temple not made with hands being the temple of the living God. No. That's, you can't have that, because that would mean that Daniel chapter 2 is messianic. And that would destroy Sam Frost's position.
And he's got Daniel chapter 2, he's got the 4th kingdom being Greece. He's got the stone cut without hands as somehow being Cyrus. And it is just bizarre. But I'll tell you why he has to make this bizarre move in Daniel 2, because Daniel 7 is a beautiful, beautiful recapitulation and building upon Daniel chapter 2. So Nebuchadnezzar has his dream in chapter 2. Daniel has his dream in chapter 7, which is a recapitulation and a development of the vision and the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. So the 4 kingdoms are presented again, except in the form not of a statue, but of 4 beasts. And instead of a stone cut without hands coming from heaven down to judge the nations of the statue, we have the Messiah coming upon the clouds of heaven, riding as the Ancient of Days, and he comes down to judge. So what we have, this is beautiful, because if you look at all of Jesus' teaching, he pretty much always connects his coming with the arrival of the kingdom. I don't care if it's Luke 17, 20 through 37, the Olivet Discourse, which we pointed out. He connects the arrival of the kingdom and the inheritance of the kingdom with his parousia in that generation, especially in Luke 21. And Paul does it in 2 Timothy 4:1. The Greek is really clear there. And it's everywhere. And so you have this beautiful parallel between the coming of the kingdom, that stone cut without hands, and the Son of Man is coming at the same time. And I would even say that the stone cut without hands being the kingdom is also, folks, the New Jerusalem that is coming from heaven to earth. It was in the process of coming down, according to the NIV translation of Revelation 3, 11, and 12. And it would soon arrive on earth in AD 70 and begin healing the nation. So that's the new covenant kingdom. That's the Jerusalem from above, the mother of us all of Galatians 4. And, you know, that it's just beautiful harmony. And one last thing, and I'll kick it over to you, is we have a beautiful development of what this kingdom is. Daniel is getting it now. It's forgiveness of sins. It's going to take place after Israel fills up the measure of her sins. Then the atonement's going to come, forgiveness of sin for his people. He's going to bring, the Messiah is going to bring an everlasting righteousness in this kingdom. This is what this kingdom is all about. And it's also going to be when he establishes a new most holy place for him to dwell in. That is descriptive of the kingdom without hands.
Yep. Amen to that. I'm not going to build on that because that was so very well expressed. I would just like to make a couple of interesting observations. You and I both know how Sam loves to boast of his scholarship and how he aligns with scholars. Well, here's the interesting thing. The very first century Jews looked upon Daniel as predictive of the Messiah and his coming kingdom. Now, later generations, post 70 AD, rabbis all of a sudden decided to expunge Daniel from any messianic application. You know, so really and truthfully, Sam Frost has adopted the Jewish view of Daniel. Now,
there's 2 Jewish views. There's the Hellenized Jewish view,
true,
of the second and third, and now we'll get into that when we get into Daniel 9. In their chronology, they did not see that as messianic, and they made the same mistake that the liberals and Sam do. But then when you have the Essenes and you have the Pharisees, they both understood and calculated that as messianic with Daniel 7.
Yes.
So, and then after AD 70, then they changed it to a non-messianic passage.
Yeah, the modern Judaism does not even accept Daniel as a prophet.
Right.
It's not even considered part of their thinking. You know, I've mentioned my friend in Israel, and I've asked him tons of questions. And after a little while, you can tell it kind of piques him a little bit because he says, "Why are you always asking questions about Daniel?" He said, "I don't like it." You know,
I bet
yeah,
you
I bet you don't. I can figure out why you don't want to be asked about Daniel, but it's well known in scholarship how the later rabbis distorted and perverted the Septuagint text in order to eliminate Messiah out of it. That's just a fact of history. And so Sam, while he may not accept those perversions of the Septuagint, he reads the Messiah out of those texts anyway.
Yeah.
And that's all he does. And maybe that explains why Sam was on record. I've got the copy and pasted discussion in which he said, I have more in common with the unbelieving Jew
Yeah.
than I do preterists.
Yeah. I
Now,
know.
folks, let that soak in. Let that soak in. Here's a man who calls himself a Christian, and he says he has more in common with unbelieving Jews in regard to Scripture than he does the preterist.
He
Let's
really
see.
does. He's rejected the messianic kingdom that Jesus foretold. Real quick before we go on, I just realized I made a mistake. I jumped the gun, so to speak. Let me go back here. Okay.
Well, while you're going there, let me make one other observation, and
Yeah.
that's on the scholarship. I just noted how first century and even prior to that, Jews accepted Daniel as messianic. No question about that. In the earliest of the early church writings, they took Daniel as messianic. So Sam Frost is out of step with them. And then a second point on Daniel chapter 7 on the coming of the Messiah on the clouds of heaven. Well, there's a guy named Elton Holland, super nice guy. In fact, I got an email from him just yesterday telling me about a forthcoming article that he has had published in one of the religious journals. Well, Elton Holland rejects Sam Frost's view of Daniel chapter 7, 13 and 14. Categorically rejects it. And he says, and he points out, gives examples of it, of when Daniel chapter 7, 9 and following says, I looked and I saw in the night vision that thrones were set. And he says, this is common language for thrones being set on earth, which is the location of the judgment.
Yeah.
The judgment is not taking place in heaven.
Yeah.
Judgment is on earth. And
Amen.
so here we have Sam, who loves to laud how he aligns with history and scholarship and church history. He is categorically out of step with church history in regard to Daniel chapter 7 or
Yeah.
Daniel overall.
Oh, I hear you. Well, real quick, because I've been in Daniel 9 all day long. I jumped the gun. I was developing the parallels between Daniel 7 and 9 when I was trying to do 2 to 7. So I already talked about the parallel between the stone cut without hands coming to judge and the Son of Man coming from heaven to judge. The other parallel that we find is in verse 22 of Daniel 7, where it would be the appointed time when the Ancient of Days would come, which in context, verses 9 and 10, Ancient of Days comes, takes his throne and judges. Verse 13, Messiah now comes as the Ancient of Days. The old Greek says as the Ancient of Days, not up to the Ancient of Days. Right. And then verse 22, this is all recapitulation. It's all the same event. So verse 22 is when the appointed time comes where the Ancient of Days gives the kingdom of Daniel 2 to the saints. And then we have recapitulation between Daniel 7 to Daniel 9, Don, especially when it comes to that appointed time, right?
Yeah. Amen. Amen. And I would simply point this out of how devastating this is when the kingdom is delivered to the saints. Now, that doesn't mean that the kingdom didn't exist before the coming of the Ancient of Days. This
Right.
is the vindication of the martyrs who are already members of the kingdom. So the kingdom being delivered to the saints is their vindication. So this is directly parallel, and I'm assuming that someone would probably want to argue with this, but in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, when Paul says, then comes the end when he delivers the kingdom to the Father. Well, that is Daniel chapter 7, excuse me.
Yeah.
That's not a different deliverance. Daniel 7, coming of the Ancient of Days, coming of the one as the Ancient of Days, in judgment, in vindication. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 is the consummation and perfection of the kingdom and the kingdom being delivered to the Father. But it's also the time of the inheritance of the kingdom by the saints. Flesh and blood shall not inherit the kingdom of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
So that inheritance is Daniel chapter 7, 22 and following. And here's the kicker to this, ladies and gentlemen. Since all of this is delimited to the time of the Fourth Empire, and this is why Sam Frost has to eliminate Daniel 7 as messianic. But it takes place, this presentation of the kingdom, this vindication of the martyrs, and thus the parallel to 1 Corinthians 15 is posited in the days of the Fourth Empire, which is Rome, which means you can't get the coming of the Ancient of Days, or you can't get the coming of the Son of Man as the Ancient of Days anywhere in our future. It had to take place in the days of the Roman Empire.
Yeah. And Sam has made a big deal about the ascension. That is, and the reason why is because the parousia and the coming of Christ in the Olivet Discourse, most commentators are going to tell you it's either the second coming or it was fulfilled in AD 70.
Yes.
And we come in there and we say, you're both right.
Yep.
Well, Sam wants to offer something else that's going to throw some mud in the whole system. And he says, well, it's the ascension. But in the debate, apparently it was the second coming. So, it's.
Yeah. He changed in the debate.
But Daniel chapter 7, folks, just read the context. It's really clear. Daniel is looking at this fourth beast. He's in awe of it because it's terrifying. And he sees in the vision how the Ancient of Days takes his throne and judges the little horn. And he wants to know more about it. And he also sees that the Son of Man, the Messiah, comes as the Ancient of Days in this judgment upon the clouds. And he wants to know more about this time of the Fourth Empire during Rome, when this beast takes place and the coming of the Son of Man takes place. And he gets an explanation. And so we have recapitulation and we get new information after the explanation. And that new information is before the Ancient of Days comes and sits on his throne and judges, before when the Son of Man comes upon the clouds as the Ancient of Days in judgment. Before that takes place, the little horn is going to wage war against the saints, which means there's going to be intense persecution, which means there's going to be martyrdom.
Right.
Before the Ancient of Days comes and delivers the kingdom to the saints. And I pointed out in our debate in Matthew 10, Matthew 24, that beautiful harmony between, the preaching, the persecution, and the parousia and the kingdom. And Jesus is drawing his eschatology from Daniel chapter 7.
And let me clarify a little bit, because Mike headed that way, but he didn't finish it out. What Mike pointed out in the debate, first point number one, remember, Sam Frost says Daniel chapter 7, 13, 14 is reference to the ascension of Christ coming before the Father and they're receiving the kingdom. Ascension, keep that in mind. That's Acts chapter 1, according to Sam Frost and Jeremiah Nortier. However, what Mike pointed out, and what he and I have been pointing out on our program consistently, is that Daniel 7 presents the coming of the Son of Man as the Ancient of Days in judgment of the little horn for persecuting the saints. Houston, Mr. Frost has a problem. Not us. Mr. Frost has a problem. Because if you posit Acts chapter 1 as Daniel chapter 7, 13, and 14, that demands, absolutely 100% demands, that the saints were being persecuted before Acts chapter 1, and that the kingdom was established or given to Christ at the ascension in Acts chapter 1. So the question Mike did pose in the debate, when were the saints persecuted? Before Acts chapter 1 and before Matthew chapter 10, 22 and 23. When were they persecuted? Well, Sam and Jeremiah became really faithful Jews during the debate because they observed the Passover. Did not
Jeremiah, literally Jeremiah. I will not answer this question. I'm deferring to Sam.
I'm deferring
He
to Sam.
literally did the Passover.
Yeah.
Sam
Brilliant.
Sam rambled on. No one understood what Sam said, and he was putting books in the camera and just flailing with it. I mean, it was just a mess. So he really didn't have any answer there either. But
well, just folks, just if you pay careful attention to what Mike and I are laying out, we're laying out what Daniel actually said, the timeline. And I know that, boy, Sam just hates for us to talk about the timeline. He literally ridicules any mention of timeline, except when he thinks he can use it against us. Well, then it counts. That's when it counts. But nonetheless, if you just pay attention to what Mike and I are doing, once again, to reiterate, we're demonstrating what Daniel said would happen when he said it would happen. And then we're showing how the New Testament writers applied Daniel to their day, their time, and applied it to the coming parousia in judgment. In judgment of the Jewish persecutors of the church in the judgment of Jerusalem in AD 70.
Yeah. And Daniel chapter 7 not only has the coming of the Son of Man upon the clouds, not only the inheritance of the kingdom, not only the persecution of the saints before his coming and the arrival of the kingdom, but it also talks about the eschatological end and a 3.5-year period. And that was another sore point in the debate, and even afterwards, Sam and I got in it on YouTube. It's just like, the end is right here. So when we go to Matthew 10 and Jesus is drawing on Daniel 7, the end, he who's
faithful until the end.
Yeah, faithful until the end. It's clear what that end is. It's not the end of a person's life. It's the eschatological end in Daniel 7 itself.
Absolutely. And I have read a couple of different posts by Sam on Matthew chapter 10, Hebrews chapter 3, I think Hebrews chapter 6, and of course, Revelation chapter 2, verse 10, be thou faithful unto death. And so he correlates that with these about then comes the end. Okay. And it being the end of their life. Oh, except Matthew chapter 24. You shall hear of wars, rumors of wars, famines, earthquakes, pestilence, etc. These are the beginning of the birth pains, but the end is not yet.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there, the end is not their life.
Right.
It's the end of human history, which he reads into the text because it's not mentioned anywhere in the text. And I should point this out. The only attempt, I don't even know if that's a fair way to describe it. The only attempt that they gave to prove that Matthew chapter 24 talked two things was Sam's little discourse on Luke, taking for granted, this is what you call eisegesis, ladies and gentlemen. He goes to Luke and he says, see the references to the end. Look at the end. Look at the end. Then comes the end, Matthew chapter 24, 8 and following. That's the end of human history. No, ladies and gentlemen. Where did Sam, or I should say, how has Sam tried to justify that identification by simply saying, well, he was drawing on the common Jewish belief of the day. No, he wasn't. Not even close to it. And folks, you need to know this. During the debate, after Sam had said, well, and Jeremiah made the same comment, made the argument that Jesus was drawing on the common Jewish belief concerning the end of the day, that it was, the end of human history. Well, the Jews didn't really believe in the end of human history. N.T. Wright and a host of other scholars are in acknowledgement of that. Did they believe that there was supposed to be a radical change within history that would change history that would change lives, etc.? Yes, they did. Did they believe in a destruction of literal physical heaven and earth? No, they did not. And so Sam Frost comes along and he says, well, the common Jew of the day believed in the end of human history, which again is absolutely not accurate. Isaiah chapter 65, after the new heaven, new earth comes, you still got sinners dying. You got babies being born. You got vineyards being planted. You got work being done. I don't know about you, Mike, but that seems like an awful lot like human history to me.
Yeah, sure does.
It
Sure
may be a
does.
different kind, of human history in regard to the outworking and the blessings of it, no doubt there, but it's not the end of human history.
Right.
And so Sam has to redefine. And of course, here's what I challenged him on. He kept saying that Jesus constantly aligned himself with the common Jewish belief of the day. But again, the answer to that is no, he didn't. Paul said to the Colossians that the Colossians had been translated out of the power of darkness into the kingdom of God's dear Son. Well, was that kingdom in conformity with the standard Jewish belief of the day? No, 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 no. As I pointed out in my debate with Richard Carrier, who made the same argument as Sam did. Let that sink in, folks.
Yeah,
Sam
he
Frost,
does have more in common with unbelievers and
he
Jews.
really does have more in common with atheists and Jews than he does with those of us who believe in the Bible and the Lordship of Jesus Christ. So, anyway, I pointed out when he said, well, Jesus accepted the Jewish belief. No, the Jewish belief of the day was that when Messiah would come, he would destroy the Romans. Did Paul believe that? Can't find that anywhere. The Jews of the day believed that Jesus, when he came back, he would rule literally, visibly, bodily from Jerusalem. Does Sam Frost believe that that's what Jesus taught? No. No. Now, he's got an earthly kingdom, to be sure, but not in conformity with first century Judaism. And the main thing, one of the main things, is that the Pharisees and the Essenes in the Dead Sea community believed that the righteous of the first century were to be the spearhead to destroy the Romans in the last days war. I wonder if Paul believed that. I wonder if Jesus believed that. Point being, ladies and gentlemen, when Sam Frost said that Jesus and his apostles were accepting of the common Jewish belief of eschatology of the day, I'm sorry, folks, that cannot be substantiated in any way whatsoever. It is just blatantly false. Okay.
Amen. All right, so we've shown the parallels between and the development between Daniel 2's kingdom and Christ's parousia coming on the clouds and the kingdom being inherited. Now we go to Daniel chapter 9. And again, this is recapitulation of Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. And like I said before, the kingdom that is inherited when the Ancient of Days comes is now described as the forgiveness of sin, the atonement of sin, bringing in everlasting righteousness, and creating this new, anointing this new most holy place to dwell, which of course is the church, the New Jerusalem, where he dwells with us today. But, basically, and then so maybe we can talk about how did Jews calculate the 70 weeks. Let me maybe talk about this just a little bit. I mentioned this earlier. Early Hellenistic, Greek-influenced Jews in the 3rd and 2nd century kind of interpreted Daniel's 70 weeks like liberals and Sam Frost. They viewed the prophecy as non-messianic and historical. The 70 weeks, 490 years, they started with the exile around 667, 640, and ending in 171 BC with the high priest Onias the third's murder as the anointed one cut off in verse 26. The abomination of desolation Verse 27 is Antiochus temple defilement with the pig. The 6 purposes of verse 24 are partially fulfilled in the Maccabean revolt and the rededication of the temple in 164. And then Josephus kind of does a hybrid of that, but he also sees AD 70 as fulfilling the 70 weeks, but he doesn't see it as messianic.
Right.
He sees it as Annas being killed, the high priest, in AD 66, but he still sees AD 70 as kind of consummating that calculation, but just not with a messianic tone. And like I said, liberals today love this view. Sam loves this view. Liberals love this view, and modern Jews, some would like this view as well, because it gets rid of, for the liberal, it gets rid of miracles in general, prophecy in general. The presupposition is miracles can't happen.
Right.
We can't have a prophecy of Jesus, let alone anything miraculous, that would take place 400, 500 years later. So they really embrace this view. But Don, this view has so many problems. Even Jews in the first century rejected this view. I mean, there were some that held it, but this thing had so many problems that they didn't even hold to it.
There's no question about that. I mentioned a few moments ago how my friend in Israel, and he's got 2 sons that are leading rabbis in Israel, and he just told me, we do not consider Daniel to be a prophet, which is really interesting, by the way, because in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they have found at least 8 different partial manuscripts of Daniel, and Daniel is called the prophet. So here are these super ultra zealous Jews out here, in the Qumran community. They certainly considered Daniel to be an inspired prophet of God. They had no qualms about that whatsoever. So that just needs to be considered. And what's interesting about this also, in the I believe it's 2nd century, pardon me, AD, a non-believing, kind of a Platonic philosopher guy named Porphyry picked up on the non-messianic application of Daniel by the Jews. And Porphyry hated Christians with a purple passion. I'm talking, he could not stand the Jews. And so it's generally believed that he picked up on the non-messianic application of Daniel on the part of the pre-Messiah Jews who just didn't see, Jesus. Of course, they didn't know about Jesus because they were in the 2nd century BC. But nonetheless, they didn't see it as messianic. So Porphyry adopted that view to use it against the message of Jesus. Now, to return to your point here, when you look at the constituent elements of Daniel chapter 9, there is absolutely no way in this world
that Antiochus Epiphanes fulfills
that
it.
the
Not even
time of
close.
Antiochus Epiphanes fits the bill.
No.
If I mean,
Don, did he desolate the city and the temple, or did he just defile the temple?
he defiled
Oh,
the city and the temple. And let me point something out that's very, very critical here. Brent Petrie, in his marvelous book, a really, really cheap book, right, Mike? Yeah, if you can find one of his books, Brent Petrie, Jesus, Tribulation, and the End of the Exile. It's out of print. Mike looked one up, found it on eBay, I guess it was.
I think that was either Zach or Rick. I think for like
was it Zach or okay.
$1,000 or something.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. No, I thought it was $150, which is well worth that in my
okay.
estimation. I wouldn't sell mine for anything. I literally wouldn't. And of course, nobody would want it because mine is so, marked up. But anyway, Brent Petrie, very, very highly respected Catholic scholar, says Daniel chapter 9, verse 26 is emphatic. The people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And as Petrie points out, this is the, quote, Achilles heel of the Antiochian view, because Antiochus and his generals simply did not destroy the city and the temple. Didn't do it.
Well, Don, surely Antiochus brought in everlasting righteousness.
Oh, of course, yeah. Well, let's back up. 70 weeks are determined to make the atonement. Well, let's talk about the death of Onias for a minute here. This is, look, on Facebook a couple of years ago now, when Sam laid out his views, non-messianic views on Daniel 9, you know, I'm sitting there reading what I'm reading from him going, bless his heart. This, you know, this can't be right. I mean, he knows better than this. So I and Julianne Chambers, a lady who she's actually an instructor, a school teacher in Australia. I don't know if she's college level or what, but she's very, very sharp. So we both start asking Sam, okay, Sam, so you say that the Messiah, the prince, was Onias and he was slain. Well, guess what? He was replaced by one of the men who conspired to kill him. That excludes that man from being a qualified high priest to make the atonement.
Not a whole lot of righteousness being ushered
There's
in,
not,
is there?
And by the way, then he was deposed by his partner who helped kill Onias.
Oh, so there's definitely no righteousness being ushered
So you
in
have
here.
two men here who take the office of the high priest ostensibly to make the atonement, but neither one of them are qualified to make the atonement.
Jeez.
So we kept asking Sam, could you please tell us how these men could make the atonement?
Right.
No answer. So we shifted to, okay, 70 weeks are determined to bring in everlasting righteousness. Sam, tell us what world of everlasting righteousness was established during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. Surely you're not going to say the Maccabees established the everlasting world of righteousness. You can start with Mattathias, the father of all of the Maccabees. He killed the general of Antiochus. You say, well, he's just being a brave guy. Well, okay, we'll stretch that. But he was still a killer. He shed blood. Then his sons were all generals in the war. And according to Jewish tradition, according to Jewish, quote, law, which may be more tradition than anything, I have asked my friend in Israel for the law, and he never could provide anything specifically from Torah. But the general belief in ancient times in Israel was any man that had shed blood, didn't matter if it's innocent, didn't matter if it's war, if you shed blood, you are disqualified. You can't be a priest. You cannot offer sacrifice. Well, every single one of Mattathias's sons were generals in the Jewish army shedding blood.
Wow.
They could not be instruments of bringing in everlasting righteousness. Now, were they Jewish heroes? Well, sure. Nobody's denying that. They actually liberated Jerusalem. They cleansed the temple, cleansed the altar. Okay, that's not bringing in everlasting righteousness, because after the Maccabees went off of the scene, every single high priest from the time of Onias onward, every single high priest purchased the office of the high priest by buying it with bribes.
Fraud, yeah.
Let me see. Everlasting righteousness.
Well, Don, surely, at during this time of Antiochus Epiphanes, God sealed up vision and prophet. He fulfilled all prophecy, and the office of prophet stopped during that
Oh
time,
yeah,
right?
sure. Except what's interesting about that within itself, John Hyrcanus, I think it was Hyrcanus, it might have been one of the other brothers, but I believe it was Hyrcanus. Once they had purged the temple, okay, they cleansed the temple. Well, now they have all of the vessels of the altar, all these gold and silver vessels of the altar. Okay, the altar has been cleansed, but they don't know who is worthy enough to use them. They've got a real dilemma on their hands. So, and again, I think it's Hyrcanus. I have to go back into my files and refresh my memory on this. Hyrcanus said, "We will put these instruments aside and we will hide them until a prophet arises to instruct us and to give us, basically to give us a high priest worthy of using the instruments."
So it wasn't the end of the office of prophet. They were hoping that a prophet would be worthy to fix the mess that they created.
Absolutely.
Oh
And
boy.
yeah, I mean, the whole history, ladies and gentlemen, to try to say that the atonement was made. Now, you could argue that the sins of Israel were filled up during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, because Daniel chapter 8 and verse 23 actually says so. And the Lord used Antiochus as an instrument against the sins of Israel, because Israel had filled up their sin during those days, which, by the way, was an appointed time. Okay, so nobody's denying that. I don't know. Sam evidently thought he had me on that in one conversation on Facebook. He said, "Don, you do know that it was the appointed time of the end, and Israel filled up the measure of their sin there in Daniel chapter 8." And I said, "Yeah, Sam, I'm well aware of that. Are you? I don't know if you think you're springing a surprise on me here, as if I'm ignorant of these facts, but Jesus is the one that said his generation was the worst generation of all. Matthew chapter 12, 43 to 45.
Yeah.
And that it was his generation that would fill up the measure of their sin and be ultimately destroyed at the day of the Lord." So, yeah, I understand. I acknowledge. I teach that Daniel 8:23, if anything, it was a forecast of what was going to come. It might have been typological. I'm perfectly fine with that.
Right.
But the point of fact is, no way, no how can you ever begin to ascribe to the days of Antiochus Epiphanes or the priesthood or any of the religious leaders in Israel. You cannot ascribe to them the job, the task, and certainly not the successful job of making the atonement, or of bringing in everlasting righteousness, or of sealing up or sealing a vision and prophecy, or to anoint the most holy. Now, Frost would say, "Oh, yeah, look, see, when Hyrcanus took the temple, they anointed the temple, they anointed the altar once again, but they didn't establish everlasting righteousness, Sam. And they didn't make the atonement, because remember, there were no qualified high priests at that time. You've got a bunch of frauds. And the the history of the priesthood from the time of the death of Onias, the murder of Onias, until the first century is a long, sordid history of debauchery, dishonesty, cruelty, fraud, etc. By the way, that's one of the reasons why the Dead Sea community was established in the first place.
Thank you for teeing that up for me.
I figured you had something maybe on
that. So we went from a really, really bad extreme, really bad, and liberals jumping on that boat, and Sam Frost jumping on that sinking boat to like Don says, boy, there's some other Jews looking at that view just going, that is crazy. That doesn't make any sense at all. This passage is purely messianic. It's going to take place during the time of the Roman Empire. In fact, let me tell you about this view. I have fallen in love with this view, although the calculation is wrong on the beginning end. This is a really cool view. It comes out of 11Q Melchizedek, the Dead Sea Scrolls. I was reading Margaret Barker many years ago, one of her articles on this, and I fell in love with this view, and I believe I've developed the correct one, and I'll probably not this show, but maybe next show we'll talk more about it. But in this view, the Essenes, the Qumran community, looked at Daniel's 70 weeks, and they said this is referring to 10 jubilees, because 49 times 10 is 490. Okay. And this goes back to, Leviticus 25 and the 70 years being based upon Sabbaths. And now we have a period of Sabbaths and jubilees. And so the problem with this is they began this 490 year period and the 10 jubilees with God restoring at the beginning of the end of the exile. So the first restoration, really, really early, they started it in 490 BC. Okay, well, if you're going to add 10 jubilees and 490 years from that period, you only get to 3 BC and 2 AD. So the consummation didn't take place at that time. But they expected when Messiah would come in the 10th Jubilee, he would come within the first 7 years of that 10th Jubilee, and he would announce himself. And he would begin his work of atonement and doing all of the things that he was supposed to do. And they believed during that last 49-year period, that 10th Jubilee, he would atone for sins. He would judge the wicked apostates. He would judge the watchers and Satan. And the battle of Gog and Magog would take place, which they saw as between Rome and apostate Jerusalem. Now, none of that happened in 3 BC to 2 AD because they had the wrong beginning point, I would argue. But this is really cool, Don, because what we have here is we have it's messianic. They're calculating this as a normal 490 year period. They're trying to, and they're developing the already and not yet of Messiah's work, that it's going to be within 49 years, not a literal 7 years. So you have that already not yet first century fulfillment in which Messiah is going to fulfill all Old Testament prophecy.
Yeah. What you shared with me the other day in a private message really piqued my curiosity. I'm not real good at this kind of calculation. I'll be the very first person to admit this. I do know this, that in the book No Stone on Another, published by Brill, Leiden Press, massive book about this big, the author pointed out that it was common belief. I believe that's his term. I'd have to go back. But it was common belief among the first century Jews that the 70 weeks of Daniel were to end with the destruction of Jerusalem.
You teed me up again. You got to stop doing that. So now we come to a third view. These are the way the Jews are calculating Daniel's 70 weeks in the first century. We're using a historical hermeneutic, not just a grammatical. I really don't care what Dallas Theological Seminary thinks about the calculations of Daniel 9, okay? So the Pharisees come along, and they are calculating Daniel's 70 weeks with 10 jubilees as well.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
But they're using a screwed up, pardon the French, a messed up calendar where they compressed the period of the Persians dominating them, which was really about 200 years or so, going through about 13 or 14 of the Persian kings, where The Pharisees came up with this calendar where they compressed that to about 34 or 50 years and only 3 or 4 of Persian kings.
Wow.
So it's historically their calendar's messed up. But get this, in God's providence, and I don't know how this happened. In God's providence, they actually have the correct start date, even with a screwed up calendar. They should have been using the Essenes calendar, which was based upon the feasts, okay, and a 364-day year calendar. But they weren't. They were using this messed up one. But they did start in 421 BC. And 421 BC, they started with the exile, not coming back and being restored in the land. They started it in the beginning of the exile, but yet they compressed all these years and made it so weird. But really, when you calculate between 421 BC to AD 70, that's 490 years exactly. Okay, so now go down to my last paragraph or my last sentence or so. This reading fueled the zealot revolt of AD 66. Don, this is what's so amazing. This amazes me. God is putting a hook into the mouth of these Jews. They looked at the Pharisees looked at Daniel 7:13 as messianic.
Yeah.
They looked at Daniel 9, 70 weeks as messianic. They expected a Messiah to come on the clouds and destroy Rome and deliver them in the battle of Gog and Magog. And they're trying to self-fulfill that prophecy, and
Yeah.
Jesus knew it all along. He says,
That's absolutely true. Yeah, that is absolutely true.
is that not bizarre or what?
And what you say here about the messed up calendar that they were using, compressing all of this time, that's what this book points out. That some of the calculations, you look at where they start, and you're going, "What?" And you wonder how they got there, and yet I won't say every one of them, but a large number of very credible rabbis from the first century period of time pointed directly to AD 70 based on their calculations of Daniel chapter 9.
They
And
absolutely
and,
did.
and like I say, we can look at it from a purely modern view of mathematics and go, "Oh man, that's crazy." But they justified it and they believed it, and they nonetheless pointed to AD 70.
Absolutely. We're a little over time, but I'll just
Yeah.
kind of tease this up. And this is my view. My view is actually a combination of the Essene. I'm following the Essene calendar. I'm not following the compressed calendar of the Pharisees that's off by 160 years. I'm using the Essene calendar that they were using in 11Q Melchizedek to calculate the coming of Messiah. But where the Essenes messed up is they started at 490 BC in the initial restoration period of Ezra and Nehemiah. There's 2 restoration periods.
Right, right,
The latter is Nehemiah 8 to 13. He
right.
comes back, he throws out Tobiah or whatever that guy's. And at that point, the city becomes holy. At that point, the full restoration takes place. That's the prophetic word that comes from Gabriel. I don't believe that the start count of this is referring to Artaxerxes, Cyrus. It's not a Gentile decree, it's a prophetic word. Daniel is reading the prophetic word. The context is he's reading the prophetic word of Jeremiah, which prophesied not only the exile, but them coming back into the land and being restored in the land. Now, that is what Daniel's praying about. He wants to know about the restoration. So now comes another prophetic word from God, from Gabriel to him. And it's from that word of restoration that comes through Nehemiah. You start there and you go to AD 70 and you have exactly 490 years. And Nehemiah is the type, and Jesus is the antitype. And I cover that in my new book.
Shameless plug, but that's okay. That's okay.
With a great appendix from this guy named Don Preston. But yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it really, that's really, really intriguing. It certainly is.
Amen. Well, we're a little over time. We had a lot of fun.
Yep, absolutely. Good time.
Right.
Good time.
Take care, brother. We'll see you maybe
All
Sunday.
right. Good
And maybe
night.
we'll talk about some more New Heavens, New Earth. We'll see.
All right. All right.
Bye.